Thank you to the organizers for this terrific conference. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here and presenting new work, or relatively new work, with Shir Aviv, who will also be presenting right after me. And I'll start quickly with a few slides for motivating what this project is about. What we're seeing is that in recent years, government agencies, public authorities are increasingly using AI-based systems that rely on big data to make decisions in a wide array of important policy domains. And that is true in the criminal justice system and in the education system, and a whole in the welfare system, and on sort of important decisions that we can think about in citizens' everyday lives, about where to locate policing forces, which child abuse allegations to investigate, how to allocate various welfare benefits. So on all these issues now, those systems are becoming more and more prominent, and we're seeing that this is generating a lively debate that is covering both the practical consequences or implications of this use, but also the ethical consequences. So there's some debate, and there's growing evidence of what it actually means in terms of the delivery of public services, whether it's improving the quality of those services or not. But then we also have real consequential debates about what it means in terms of transparency and accountability, what it means in terms of discrimination and encoding bias, and obviously issues of privacy. And those issues are real, and in some cases are also bleeding into the public discussion to the extent that we've got backlash when the public learns about the use of those systems as dominant in making those decisions. And so we had examples in policing, so police departments both in New Orleans and in LA had to backtrack on large contracts for relying on those AI-based policing systems when it came to light that the public was angry about the use of those systems, sort of came out and people were demonstrating, and ultimately they backtracked on those large contracts. We had a high-profile case in the UK when the Boris Johnson government backtracked on the use of those systems in the education system. So we have more and more examples of those. And what we're seeing is that both governments and now private enterprises are saying that sort of the solution to this problem might be that we need to bring in the public to be a lot more active and involved both in the design of those systems and in questions of the implementation. So last year we had one prominent example where the White House, the Biden administration, came out with a 73-page document that was the AI Bill of Rights, and there they make this argument: the public should be consulted in the design, implementation, deployment, acquisition, and maintenance phases of automated system development with an emphasis on early stage consultation, Okay, so this is very prominent as a line here. We see it 32 times in this short document being used again and again, the idea of the public input as prominent. And this raises some important questions that we're trying to get at in this project. So the first one is, what does it mean? So how do people actually view the use of AI in determining important decisions regarding policy implementation? So one question, if we just went out to the public and asked them about those different domains, is it okay to use it in deciding where to locate police forces, how to allocate welfare benefits? What would be their views? But we think this is okay. This is an interesting initial question here. But the more important question, if we think about bringing in the public as a solution to the problem that I discussed, is what does it mean, sort of how do people's views evolve in response to personal experience and to exposure to information when they learn more about the technology's implications, okay? So much of where the action is now in terms of the discussion about AI regulation is really about understanding what does it mean now, what are the kind of fora that we need to generate, how does public input help us understand the ways to actually move forward in a way that would be aligned with the people's preferences, sensitivities, and values. Now, getting at these questions is pretty tough, in part because it's not clear how to go about it. We've got different theoretical accounts for what might be going on. Going back to Baobao's question, it could be that people just have strong priors and predispositions that they're anti-tech and that they're very suspicious of any new technology, and that now introducing a new technology such as AI is something that people would oppose. And that irrespective of new information and irrespective of the kind of experiences that they have, they're going to oppose it. And so here would be up on the upper left side, that doesn't matter what happened, kind of experiences or information is not going to change their views. Or we have different accounts on how people do update, whether it's in response to information, whether it's in response to experiences, whether it's a kind of motivated experience, a motivated reasoning experience. All of those different views, I'm not going to get into them in detail. The real issue to note here is that it's going to be very difficult to test it because obviously people are endogenously or choosing to learn about the information, how much they're going to engage with the information. So just correlating those types of information, levels of information or experiences with people's attitudes is not going to give us much purchase about those questions that I laid out. And that is why the solution that we're going to be looking at in this paper is by carrying out a field experiment that is going to be happening in a labor market context. And why we choose this context is because a lot of where people are actually confronting ADSs, those automated decisions that are affecting decisions related to them, are in labor market functions. So that's true with employee recruitment and to task allocation and in QA. So really important functions that are being used by those systems. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be employing 1,500 workers on an online labor platform, which is going to be MTurk. And through this experiment, we're going to try and get at those questions of whether people are willing and able to actually use information or personal experiences that they have in informing the way that they think about this broader question, should those systems be used for important policy implementation decisions, okay? So in a very high level, what we're going to be interested in tracking how those views evolve over time. We're going to have a panel design here that is going to have a pre-treatment survey, a set of interventions, and then the post-treatment survey. And the surveys are going to capture people's views exactly on this question of where and when those systems should be used in various different domains. And the three interventions that we're going to be introducing, one is going to be about the experience. Some people are going to be working in conditions where the decision maker is going to be an automated decision system, an algorithm, and the others are going to be working under a decision of an HR team. The second intervention is going to be the type of experience. So whether it's going to be what we call a positive or a negative experience, and what we mean here is basically, is the system or the decision maker going to call the decisions in ways that align with my preferences and interests or not, with what my desires are. And the last thing is going to be, people are going to be exposed to different, through the task itself, the content of the task is going to expose them to different information. Some are going to learn about the upsides of the technology, of AI technology. Some are going to be exposed primarily to the risks and downsides, and others are going to have a placebo that is going to be about the fashion industry. Okay? So that is generally the design that we're going to be looking at. And this is how it's going to look. It's going to look at, we're going to start at T+0, then 3 days later we're going to return to them, and then 7 days later we're going to return with a post-intervention survey. And now I'll very briefly try and explain what the design, actually how it operates. So if now you're tuning out, this is actually the few minutes that you need to understand what the experiment is going to look like, okay? So in the pre-treatment survey, basically they're invited to fill in a survey, a fairly simple survey that asks them on a bunch of different issues, but it includes one matrix that is going to be key for our dependent variable. They're going to be asked about 8 different domains, decision domains in policy, whether having that decision made by a predictive algorithm rather than by a human being, whether they support it or oppose it, okay? And that includes, fairly benign issues such as where to place street lighting, where police forces should patrol, whether to approve certain immigrant visa applications, whether to issue restraining orders to individuals. All of these cases are real-world questions or instances where we actually see this technology being used, okay? So we're going to ask them those 8 items, and there later we're going to generate an index that is going to allow us to have like one simple measure of their general view on the use of those technologies in different policy domains. Very briefly, I'll say that if we just look descriptively at how people's intuitions currently are about those different uses in different issues, the green to the right are support and the brown is opposition. 3 things I want to say on this graph. One is that we see by and large people are generally quite skeptical in delegating those decisions to algorithms rather than to humans. The second is that we clearly have big variation across different domains. In some issues, people are very reluctant. In others, they're generally quite supportive, and somewhere in between in the other policies. And the last thing is that this is on the sample of workers that we're going to be looking at, those 1,500 workers. When we carried out in a separate national study the same set of questions, we got almost identical responses. So just to say here, this is capturing something that I think is much broader than the specific sample of MTurk workers, okay? So what we did here is initially we invite them to do the survey. They finish the survey. At the end of the survey, we're going to ask them, do you want to continue with us as employers? They got paid for the survey. And in the future, would you want to continue working with us? And those that say yes, and the overwhelming share of them say yes, we then say there are going to be 2 tasks that are going to be 8-minute tasks. One is the standard task that you're going to have to catalog text based on their content, or that there's a higher paying task that is a rating task based on their tone, also an 8-minute task, but this one is going to pay $3 rather than $1. And the difference also that we're saying is that we need this, it's only for people, or sort of primarily for people who are good at seeing the big picture. So the idea here was to generate 2 tasks. One is clearly more desirable and a higher status one, pays 3 times as much, and for people who are good at seeing the big picture. And we wanted people then, they were asking them, which one do you think is more suitable to you and which one do you prefer to do? And over 90% of them ask for, obviously, for the higher status, higher paying task. And then we say, thank you very much. We'll review your performance, and then we'll get back to you in a few days. And so then in 3 days later, we return to them. They receive an invitation to their inbox to come back, and they're just informed that they have an invitation to another task. They don't know still which task they're going to be conducting. And when they come in, now they're going to be informed of which task they actually were selected to carry out. And what is going to be key here is that basically a 2x2. Are they going to receive the task that they wanted, the higher paying task, or not? And is the decision maker that made the decision, is it going to be an algorithm or a member of the HR team? So in this case, we're going to be looking at the case where the treatment is an algorithm, and you're getting basically the bad news, a negative experience. So we're telling them, we're reminding them what were the 2 tasks. We're telling them, as is probably obvious, not all workers are equally capable of seeing the bigger picture. And now we're telling them, sorry to let you know that the algorithm system evaluated your performance in the previous task, and it's decided you are less suited to perform the rating task. Then we're telling them, if you want, you can continue with the cataloging task. I'll show you the other version of that. This is a case where we're telling them again, as it's probably obvious, not everybody is capable of seeing the bigger picture, but now we're telling them, happy to let you know, in line with your request, Danielle, a member of our team, evaluated your performance in the previous task and decided that you are suited to perform the rating task. Okay? So a 2x2, do you get the task that you wanted, the higher paying task, and whether it's a decision maker that is a human or an algorithm, and we also randomized, some were receiving Danielle and others Daniel, so to get rid of any gender issues in terms of who is the decision maker. Okay? We also asked them later whether they agree with this decision. They could also appeal it. I'll just give you a couple of comments here. Some people, when they're being denied the task, they're saying, algorithms have bugs sometimes, it's not my fault. I know myself of 46 years, better than Danielle knows me. So there are many comments that we got here. People were obviously writing more and more pissed off when they didn't get the task they wanted. But the key thing here that I think we want to take from it is that actually when in their responses also they were often relating to or mentioning the specific decision maker, whether they were annoyed by the algorithm or whether by the individual. So clearly it was something that was resonating in the way that they read the information. Okay, so now what is the task? The task, and that is key here, everybody, whether it's the cataloging task or the rating task, it's the same task. Okay, so we wrote it in a way that was sufficiently close to the description. The description was sufficiently close to the task they're going to perform. Whether it's the rating or the cataloging, they get the exact same task, only not knowing that there's no difference in the task of whether it would have been one or the other. Okay, the content of the information, what they're being asked now is to rate those comments in terms of how positive or negative they are in terms of the prediction. And so, for instance, if you're getting the treatment about information about AI, you're going to have 8 statements. If it's the negative treatment, you're going to get the predominantly negative statement, 7 out of 8. If it's the positive one, it's going to be mostly positive statements, 7 out of 8. So this is the negative one. We're seeing expert opinions or predictions, despite perceptions that algorithms are somehow neutral and uniquely objective. They can often reproduce and amplify existing prejudices. So you need now to put them on the scale from a -100 to +100. So people have to actually engage with this information in order to carry out this task. Okay? They're not only exposed to the information, they have to think about it a little in order to carry out the task properly. And so they're going to do that on all those different treatments. We said the placebo are going to see 8 statements about the future of the fashion industry. Okay? All right. T+7, we return to those individuals from a different invitation of an employer, different user interface. They're carrying a different task. It's going to have a whole range of questions in a survey, but we're going to ask them the same set of 8 questions of the matrix that you saw before about those policy domains, and now we're interested ultimately whether the experience and the information affected how they think about this broader question of using this technology in those different policy contexts. Okay? So, in the remaining minutes that I've got here, very, very briefly in terms of the results. The first result to take away from this regression is that the personal experience, whether you had a decision maker deciding on you that was an algorithm or a human, whether it was a positive experience or a negative experience, had no effect whatsoever. It's a tightly estimated zero, whether it's a TOT, ITT, any way that we look at it, clearly had no effect. The first question that we ask when we're seeing those results doesn't mean that people just didn't pay much attention to the treatment. It was too weak of a treatment, didn't care much on whether it's a human or an algorithm, didn't care much whether it's a $1 or $3, didn't have an effect. The answer is clearly no. When we look at the different aspects of the way they performed the task, in terms of how much time they invested in it, how well they performed the task in terms of attention, how satisfied they were in carrying out the task, we see clear differences. People were more satisfied, invested more time, carried out the task better when it was a human employer rather than an algorithm. Okay? So we have a separate study specifically about this idea of AI as boss. We think very interesting results here that people actually perform and are motivated to perform differently when employed by an algorithm as opposed, or the decision maker being a human as opposed to an algorithm. So we saw that people did respond in terms of the task. They didn't in terms of the experience. Doesn't mean that just attitudes are really, really sticky. People don't update their views irrespective of anything. As Bao suggested earlier, just whether I'm pro or anti the use of those technologies, and I'm not going to update it in any meaningful way as a function of experiences or information. So we saw that experiences didn't have an effect. Information very much did. People did update in a fairly significant manner in the direction of the information that they saw. Okay? Now don't forget, we're interviewing them in T+7. It's not that we ask them immediately after seeing this information. We return to them several days later, ask them those same set of policy domain questions, and we clearly see that this information filtered to the extent that it actually had some impact in moving their views in the direction of the predictions or the expert predictions that they read several days before. Okay? So we can also see that this effect was actually non-trivial even in a substantive sense when we compare, for instance, the effect of information. Negative information was pretty much in line with the difference between having a college degree and no college degree. Okay? So on many scales that we can think of, these are actually meaningful differences that are moving people in the direction of the information, and that is something that we can compare to things that we appreciate and know are quite determinant of how people think about different policy questions. Okay, so to wrap up, the first thing that we saw here is that personal experience with AI as boss did influence workers' performance and behavior on the job, but didn't have an impact on their attitudes towards AI. We saw that people, sort of on the big question of, do people project their own experiences with those systems to the broader policy question? We didn't have evidence of that. We don't find that people's own experiences, bad or negative or positive, translating into how they think about the policy question. We don't find evidence of that. But clearly, it's not the case that people are fully entrenched in their priors and don't update at all. We saw that the information did have an impact, was actually quite meaningful. Exposure to information about AI did bring a change in people's view on the use of the technology. And this we can also show, I didn't have time to show, primarily on those policies in between, not on those where they were very supportive or very much opposed to, but all those issues in between. That's where we see most of the action in terms of the movement of attitudes. So just one last final point. I think, or so we think, that we're in a kind of open window where people's views on this issue of technology are still sufficiently malleable and haven't been fully politicized. Take other issues that are technical, such as COVID, on vaccines, or on climate change, that we would think that expertise would really matter. And what we saw is that once they are politicized, people very much toe the party line and quite difficult to get them away from what the partisan stance is. AI regulation is still an open issue. Both, I think, governments and private enterprises are going to have big interest in actually educating the public in ways that are going to be beneficial to them. And we think that this is actually a really important moment in trying to think of how we get people to think in meaningful ways about the introduction of this technology so that we get useful regulation on those technologies in the coming years that will be reflective of those interests and preferences that people have. So I'll stop here. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Yotam. All right. So this is a very interesting study. I like the here. I like the design a lot. But I just want to make a comment on the very last sentences that you said about the party lines, the division, and the polarization around the issues. So my view is that what's going to happen. So it's hard to say what's going to happen, but based on what we know about political behavior.
I didn't hear.
Should I start it over?
No, just the last sentence.
So what I say, based on what we know about political behavior, about polarization, formation of polarization, public opinion. So once the parties decide about which side to stand in a political issue, partisans are going to follow suit. They're going to follow the party lines, whatever the party decides to do. And that's a huge influence, especially in the United States. And so I just want you to elaborate a little more on this last part that you said about this open window. So it is an open window until the political elite decides which side to take, right? So, but from the perspective of normative or pressure from the bottom up, in terms of regulation, so if the political elite decides to advertise that they are against it, the Democratic Party decides to advertise that they are against regulation of AI, and the Republican Party is going the other way, so probably you're going to have a partisan division pretty soon taking place, right? So I just want you to elaborate a little more on this open window and how you think about this. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Felipe?
Yes. This is very interesting. So I just had some clarifying questions about the design, particularly if you perhaps saw more attrition for those that got the cataloging task provided by the AI, because it would be my sense that for them, like maybe the opportunity cost of remaining in the survey experiment just increases and they drop out, and whether you also saw that this might have affected the 7-day follow-up survey that you mentioned, and part of what I'm saying this is because I noticed that for some questions or outcomes, I hope my eyesight was not too bad looking at them, but like it seemed that the sample sizes were changing a lot, and so yeah, that's it.
Somebody up there, yeah? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is super interesting as well. And I had just one kind of broader question about technology that I'll get to, but specifically on the design, which I liked, the one thing that seemed a little odd, at least in the very brief presentation, was that all of a sudden they're told that the algorithm made this decision about whether they got the job they wanted or not, or a person did. And it seems to me that there's like a latent surprise built into that it's not clear from your presentation that I would expect, I wouldn't go into it expecting there's going to be an algorithmic decision in a sense. And it's almost like you've kind of violated my expectations or violated my trust. And so I don't know if you had an alternative version of the treatment that left it unspecified, just kind of almost passive voice, like you were not selected to do the better task. And you don't say why, you don't say who did it, you just kind of let them fill in the blanks with what they were already expecting anyways. Because the findings you're seeing are actually fairly consistent with the type of thing you see in lots of task experiments when workers are like, they're pissed about, they feel like their expectations or whatever have been not lived up to, not that they necessarily don't like technology. And so it seems to me it's kind of baked into the way you're executing it, and I'd be curious if there's a way around that, or if there's a way to show that no, it's maybe their expectations were violated, but it's because they were violated by technology and not a human or something else that matters. The bigger one was in terms of these policy areas and the use of algorithms or something, and some of the images you showed were pretty remarkable with that as well, and that's kind of who owns the tech and how is it being developed? And in particular, this notion of procurement and contracting with private entities that are not auditable, where the algorithm is viewed as a trade secret versus something that could be open source, appealable, or that government is building internally in a way that might be more transparent to citizens, is obviously not directly part of this specific study, but it seems like a broader concern that I actually haven't seen addressed in the kind of public opinion approach to this stuff, and it might be worth exploring.
Okay, Yotam, go ahead. Oh, Mike, did you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question that kind of follows, that tags right onto that, which is that in this world where we seem to see that the public has inconsistent and poorly formed attitudes about this technology, Aren't we in a world where, when we think about this from a political representation perspective, that's extremely problematic because the policymakers are going to get out ahead of the public, right? In perhaps put together inconsistent, problematic regulations that may not be supported by the public.
Okay, Yotam, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, thank you all. Thanks for these comments. Okay, so very briefly in the order. Party line, why open window? So I think for the reasons that you just mentioned. So I think that parties are still trying to figure out what is the right stance to take, but also what is going to be electorally beneficial. We still don't know because people, I think, are now forming their views and are increasingly having experiences, personal experiences, and are hearing more about it. So I think that in a few years' time, it may well be that we're going to have a similar conference and we'll already have very clear views of where the Republican Party is and the Democrats and in other countries as well. We're not there yet. And so in that sense, I think that there is an open window and that people could be influenced in certain ways. And that I think that how they are influenced could also then shape the decisions of parties where to align. So clearly the parties are also going to have other considerations, not only what their electorate wants, but also what their donors want and what big business wants and many other things. But I think that public opinion is going to be a key here, and how it's going to be shaped is partly based on those things that we looked at today, information, personal experiences, etc. And I think we're trying to do a first step in trying to understand whether it has any impact, and if so, in what kind of way it's incorporated in people's views. Okay, so that would be kind of my rough take in terms of what's this open window. And on the second question of selective attrition, two things. One is that we do see that if you got the negative task, you're about 2 percentage points, 2.5 percentage points more likely to drop out. But what's key for us is whether there was selective attrition in that, or differential attrition, whether you were denied the lucrative task by an algorithm or human. And there the answer is no. It's the same dropout whether the one denied you was an algorithm or human. So in that sense, we don't have that problem. Okay? And by and large, I just say that we did, I think, a pretty good job in getting them to actually participate in the study. So our relative rates of attrition were low compared to quite a few other studies that we looked at. Okay? In terms of sample size fluctuating, it doesn't at all. I just didn't explain that. We compare sometimes when we did certain subsets of the data to see whether in samples, for instance, those that weren't exposed to the information manipulation and only to the fashion information, so suddenly we cut the sample by half. But we just did it on different subsamples to show that whatever way that we looked at the data, we get consistent results here. In the case of the first results, just a clear null result. Okay? Violating expectations, John's question. So I would say this. First of all, I didn't explain it in detail here, but in the first survey, we asked additional items that would provide some kind of idea to the users of how those systems, the decisions were made. So for instance, we include in the first survey a Rorschach test. They see some picture that's kind of this weird picture like a Rorschach test, and they need to say what they see in this picture and describe it in detail. Okay? So we gave different items that people don't quite know what it was based their decision on, who can see the big picture, but we gave certain components to that study that people could imagine that maybe this was based on. Okay? Now, you come several days later and you're told, well, you know, our HR team decided that you're not particularly suitable, or our algorithm decided you're not particularly suitable. Maybe, it's interesting to me that you think that there's like a strong sense of violation of trust or not. I think most of them read it, got it, maybe were annoyed at not getting the decision they wanted. I'd want to hear more on sort of what you think is exactly kind of the violation of trust, but at least to us, I don't think it was obvious that there is one. I think people, you get this information, and whether you like it or not, and whether it has an impact, and clearly it had an impact at least on the way that they perform their task. Whether it's this violation of trust is a question. I don't know. Like it's worth thinking about. Who owns the data? You think it's worth exploring? I agree. I think I didn't think about this. I think it's a good topic to get at. And does it matter whether we think the government owns it, whether we think it's private enterprises that have access to that data? I think that's a good one. I haven't looked at it, and I don't think I've seen a study that did it before. And on the last question, policymakers will get ahead of the public. I don't know. It's a question. Will they get ahead? Will they have an interest in getting ahead of the public? Will it be something that, first of all, they'll get stronger weight for the public to have stronger signals of what they want and what they're concerned about? I don't know. I can see arguments in both ways. It's not clear to me that they have an interest in doing so. Maybe in some sides, whether private entities will have an interest in getting the politicians to move in certain regulations that go ahead of where the public is, possibly. I don't know, have to think more about it.
All right, thanks, Yotam.
Thank you.